Marcus Johnson was 17 years old, and he had nothing. Not a bed, not a warm meal waiting for him, not a single person in the world who was expecting him to come home that night. He had been sleeping behind a grocery store called FreshMart on the edge of Columbus, Ohio, for almost 3 weeks. The spot he had found was between two large trash bins, and he had placed a torn piece of cardboard on the ground to keep the cold from coming up through the concrete and into his bones. He had one backpack. Inside it were 2 shirts, a pair of socks, a small notebook with a broken pen tucked into the spiral, and a library card that he could no longer use because the nearest library was 4 miles away and his shoes had a hole in the left sole. He was not stupid. Anyone who looked at Marcus and thought that would be making the biggest mistake of their life. He had been an honor student at Jefferson High School before everything fell apart. He had loved mathematics. He used to finish his homework before dinner and then sit at the kitchen table doing extra problems from a textbook his teacher had given him, just because he enjoyed the way numbers made sense when nothing else did. Numbers never lied to you. Numbers never left. His mother had left when he was 14. She had struggled with addiction for years, and one morning Marcus woke up and her room was empty. She had taken the television and the small amount of cash she kept in a coffee mug on the shelf, and she had not come back. He had lived with his grandmother after that, a quiet woman named Edna who smelled like lavender and cooked grits every Sunday morning. But Edna had passed away 8 months ago from a stroke, and the apartment lease was in her name, and the landlord had given Marcus exactly 2 weeks before he changed the locks. There was no other family. No uncle who stepped in, no cousin who made a phone call, no church member who offered a spare room. Marcus had knocked on a few doors. He had made a few calls. And then he had stopped asking, because being turned away hurt more than the cold ground ever could. So he learned to live quietly. He learned which restaurants threw out food at what time. He learned that the gas station on 5th Street had a bathroom that was unlocked until 11 at night. He learned that the FreshMart employees changed shifts at 7 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, and that during those transitions, no one was really watching the area near the loading dock where he kept his things. He was careful. He was clean as a person could be without a shower. He used the gas station bathroom to wash his face and his hands every morning. He kept his clothes folded inside his backpack. He was trying, every single day, to hold himself together. On a Tuesday in early November, Marcus counted the coins in the small zipper pocket of his backpack. He had been collecting them slowly, from the ground mostly, from parking lots and sidewalk cracks, and once from a fountain near the bus station where people threw wishes they forgot about by the time they reached their cars. He counted $4.63. It had taken him almost 2 weeks to get that much. He held the coins in his palm and looked at them for a long moment. Then he picked up his backpack and walked into FreshMart. He did not take a basket. He did not want to look like he was shopping for more than he could carry. He walked slowly through the aisles, looking at prices with the careful attention of someone who could not afford a single mistake. He picked up a can of baked beans that cost 99 cents. He picked up a small loaf of bread that was on sale for $1.49. He stood in the cereal aisle for almost 4 minutes, looking at a box of oatmeal that cost $1.89, doing the math in his head, calculating whether he could afford all 3 or just 2. He decided on all 3. That left him with 26 cents. He held the items carefully, 1 against his chest and 2 in his hands, and he walked to the checkout line. The cashier was a young woman named Brianna, maybe 20 years old, with braids pulled back and small gold earrings shaped like stars. She scanned the beans. She scanned the bread. She scanned the oatmeal. The total came to $3.55 plus tax, and the final number on the screen said $3.72. Marcus set the items on the counter and began pulling coins from his pocket. He placed them on the small rubber mat near the card reader, one by one, counting quietly under his breath. Quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies. Brianna watched him without saying anything. The man behind Marcus in line shifted his weight and let out a short breath through his nose. Marcus counted everything twice. He had $3.63 on the counter. He was 9 cents short. He looked up at Brianna and said, in a voice that was steady even though his heart was not, that he was sorry and that he was 9 cents short. He asked if he could put the oatmeal back. Brianna looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the coins on the counter. Then she opened the small drawer near the register where cashiers sometimes kept pennies for customers who needed them, and she took out 9 cents and pressed them into the drawer count without a word. She put the oatmeal in a small plastic bag with the beans and the bread, and she pushed it across the counter toward Marcus and told him to have a good day. He said thank you. He meant it more than she would ever know. He picked up the bag and turned to leave, and that was the moment that everything in Marcus Johnson's life began to quietly change, though he did not know it yet, and would not know it for several more minutes. Standing near the exit of FreshMart, looking at his phone and waiting for someone, was a man named David Calloway. David was 53 years old, broad-shouldered, with gray coming in at his temples and a dark blue coat that had cost more than Marcus's grandmother had paid in rent for 3 months. David was the chief executive officer of a mid-sized food distribution company called Callaway Fresh Partners, which supplied produce and packaged goods to grocery chains across the Midwest, including, as it happened, FreshMart. He came into this particular location occasionally, not because he needed to grocery shop, but because he believed in seeing the stores that carried his products with his own eyes. He believed in walking the floors and watching how customers moved and what they picked up and what they put back down. He had been watching Marcus since the cereal aisle, not in a suspicious way, not the way some people watched a young black teenager in a store, tracking his movements with narrowed eyes and tightened jaws. David watched Marcus the way someone watches a person they recognize without being able to explain why. He watched the way the boy read every price label. He watched the way he carried 3 items pressed against his body because he had not taken a basket. He watched the boy stand in front of the oatmeal for nearly 4 minutes. And something about that stillness, about the complete seriousness on his face as he did math that most adults would have done carelessly and quickly, made David stop walking and simply observe. He had watched Marcus go through the checkout line. He had watched the coins come out of the pocket one by one. He had watched Brianna add the 9 cents without being asked, and he had felt something move in his chest at that small and quiet act of humanity. And then Marcus had turned with his plastic bag, and David had seen his face fully for the first time, and what he saw was not what he expected. He expected to see defeat. He expected the hollow eyes and the caved shoulders of someone who had stopped believing in anything. Instead, he saw a face that was tired. Yes, deeply tired, but behind the tiredness there was something else. There was a sharpness. There was a young man who was still paying attention to the world, even though the world had not been paying attention to him. David Calloway looked at the plastic bag in Marcus's hand. 3 items, for dollars and change, paid in coins that had been collected from the ground. And he stood completely still near the exit of that store and did not say a single word for a long moment. Because some things hit you in a place that words have not yet reached. David Calloway had not become a chief executive officer by being a man who stood still for long. He had built his company from a single refrigerated truck and a list of 12 clients into a business that employed over 400 people and moved millions of dollars in goods each year. He made decisions quickly. He trusted his instincts. And every instinct he had, standing near the exit of FreshMart on that cold Tuesday morning in November, was telling him not to let that boy walk out the door. He moved fast, but not in a way that would frighten anyone. He had enough self-awareness to know how a large man moving quickly toward a young black teenager in a store could look, and he was not that kind of man, and he did not want to be mistaken for that kind of man. So he walked at a normal pace, deliberately calm, and he pushed through the glass door just a few seconds after Marcus stepped outside. Marcus was standing on the sidewalk, pulling the zipper of his backpack up over the plastic bag he had just tucked inside. He was not rushing. He had nowhere to rush to. He looked up when he heard the door open behind him, and his expression did not change much. He had learned to keep his face steady around strangers. It was safer that way. David stopped a few feet away and held up one hand slightly, not a wave exactly, more of a signal that said he was not a threat. He introduced himself simply. He said his name was David and that he had been inside the store and had noticed Marcus, and that he was sorry if that sounded strange, but he was hoping Marcus had a moment to talk. He said he would buy him a coffee if there was a place nearby, and that he had some questions he wanted to ask, and that Marcus was completely free to say no. Marcus looked at him. He was good at reading people. 3 weeks on the street had sharpened something in him that school never could, a fast and precise ability to figure out whether someone meant him harm. He looked at David's face and at his posture and at the way he was standing back at a respectful distance, and he decided after about 4 seconds that this man was not dangerous. He did not know what the man wanted, but he said yes, because it was cold and the mention of coffee had reached something in him that he could not ignore. There was a small diner called Patty's Grill 2 blocks away. They walked there without saying much. David held the door open and Marcus went inside, and they sat across from each other in a booth near the window. A waitress came and David ordered 2 coffees and asked Marcus if he wanted anything to eat. Marcus said no automatically, the way he always said no when someone offered him something, because he had spent months practicing the word so that he would never seem like he was asking for anything from anyone. David nodded, and when the waitress came back, he ordered a plate of eggs and toast and slid it across the table without making anything of it. Marcus looked at the plate. He looked at David, and then he pulled it toward him and ate, because he was hungry, and because something about the way David had done it, quietly and without ceremony, made it possible to accept. David asked him questions. Simple ones at first. He asked Marcus how old he was. He asked him what part of town he was from. He asked him if he was in school. Marcus answered carefully, giving just enough to be polite without giving anything that could be used against him. He said he was 17. He said he had gone to Jefferson High. He said he was not currently in school. He did not explain why. David did not push. But then David did something that Marcus had not expected. He pushed a paper napkin across the table and put a pen on top of it and told Marcus that he had a problem he had been thinking about that morning. He said he was trying to figure out the most cost-efficient way to route 3 delivery trucks across 8 locations on the west side of the city, and that his logistics manager was out sick, and that he had been going over the numbers in his head without landing on a clean answer. He said he was not sure why, but something told him to ask. He wrote the parameters on the napkin. 8 addresses, 3 trucks, different time windows, varying load weights. Marcus looked at the napkin. Something shifted in his face, and for the first time since they had sat down, the careful guardedness dropped slightly. He picked up the pen. He did not ask for another piece of paper or for a calculator or for more time. He started writing, cleanly and quickly, and the numbers came out of him the way breathing comes out of a person who has been underwater and has finally surfaced. He grouped the addresses by geography first, then factored in the time windows, then adjusted for load weight distribution across the 3 vehicles. It took him 6 minutes. He pushed the napkin back across the table. David looked at what Marcus had written. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up. What Marcus had done, in 6 minutes on a paper napkin with no calculator and no maps, was produce a routing solution that was nearly identical to the one his logistics software had taken 40 minutes to calculate the week before. The approach was slightly different. The sequence on one truck was more elegant than what the software had suggested. David had a master's degree in business from Ohio State University. He employed people whose entire job was to solve problems like this one. And this boy, this 17-year-old who had just paid for beans and bread with coins from the ground and could not afford 9 cents, had just done it on a napkin in a diner while eating someone else's eggs. David set the napkin down very carefully, the way you set something down when you are aware that it is more valuable than it looks. He asked Marcus, without any drama in his voice, where he had learned to think like that. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said he had not learned it anywhere in particular. He said numbers had always made sense to him. He said his teacher at Jefferson, a man named Mr. Okafor, had told him once that he had a mind for systems, for seeing how things connected. He said he had liked that. He said it was the best thing anyone had ever told him. David asked him why he had left Jefferson High. Marcus wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. The heat came through the ceramic and into his palms, and he held it there for a moment before he answered. Then he told David, in a flat and factual voice, without asking for sympathy and without leaving anything important out, what had happened. His mother leaving, his grandmother dying, the apartment, the 2 weeks, the cardboard behind the store. David listened to the whole thing without interrupting and without changing his expression in a way that would make Marcus feel like he was being pitted. When Marcus finished talking, David did not say he was sorry, because Marcus had not said any of it to get an apology. What David said instead was that he had a question, and that Marcus could take as long as he needed to answer it. He asked Marcus what he wanted, not what he needed, not what he was hoping someone would give him. What did Marcus Johnson, if everything had been different, actually want for his life? Marcus looked out the window at the street. A city bus went by. A woman walked past with a small dog on a leash. He had not been asked that question in a very long time. He had been so focused on surviving, on the next meal and the next night and the next cold morning, That wanting something had started to feel like a luxury he could not afford, the same way he could not afford the 9 cents for oatmeal. But he answered. He said quietly, still looking at the window, that he had wanted to study engineering, that he had wanted to understand how systems were built, not just how to calculate them, but how to design them. He wanted to build things that worked, things that helped people, things that were solid and real and did not fall apart. He said he knew that probably sounded like a lot for someone sitting in a diner with $4.26 to his name. David Calloway picked up the napkin from the table and folded it and put it in the inside pocket of his coat, close to where his heart was. He said it did not sound like a lot at all. He said it sounded exactly right. 3 days after that morning in Patty's Grill, David Calloway made 6 phone calls. He was not a man who acted on emotion alone. He had gone home after meeting Marcus, had sat in his home office for 2 hours, and had thought carefully about what he had seen and heard. He had been in business long enough to know that a good instinct was only the beginning. What came after the instinct was the work, and he was willing to do the work. The first call was to a woman named Sandra Reyes, who ran a nonprofit organization in Columbus called Second Step. Second Step helped young people who had aged out of foster care or lost housing due to family instability, and Sandra was one of the most capable people David knew. He had donated to her organization for 4 years. He trusted her completely. He explained what he had seen at FreshMart, what had happened in the diner, the napkin, the routing solution, all of it. Sandra listened without interrupting. When he finished, she told him to bring Marcus in. The second call was to a man named Henry Park, who served on the board of a private scholarship foundation that David had helped fund 7 years earlier. The foundation supported academically gifted students who faced significant financial barriers. David told Henry about Marcus and asked what the process looked like for someone in an emergency housing situation who had left school due to circumstances beyond their control. Henry said he would make some calls of his own. The third call was to the principal of Jefferson High School. David did not know the man personally, but he introduced himself and explained that he was a business leader in Columbus calling about a former student. The principal, a tired-sounding man named Mr. Graham, told David that Marcus had been a standout student before his situation changed, that his teachers had been sorry to lose him, and that if Marcus wanted to return and complete his diploma, Jefferson would work with him on scheduling and make it happen. The fourth call was to his own office manager, a woman named Pam who had worked for him for 11 years and who had, in that time, helped him solve problems that seemed impossible. He asked her to find a furnished room in a safe part of the city that could be rented month to month. She called him back in 40 minutes with 3 options. The fifth call was back to Sandra Reyes, to arrange for Marcus to come to Second Step the following morning. David did not tell Marcus all of this over the phone. He had gotten Marcus's number during their conversation at the diner, and when he called him that evening, he simply told him that he had spoken to a woman who ran an organization that helped young people in his situation, and that he thought Marcus should meet her. He said he would pick him up himself. He asked Marcus where he was staying. There was a pause on the line. Marcus said he was staying near FreshMart. David said he would be there at 9 in the morning. When David's car pulled up behind the grocery store the next day, Marcus was already standing outside, backpack on, face clean, hair neat. He had used the gas station bathroom to get ready. He had folded his 2 shirts inside his backpack and zipped it closed and stood up straight, because wherever this was going, he was going to arrive at it looking like someone who was serious. David got out of the car and shook Marcus's hand and did not say a word about where Marcus had spent the night. He simply opened the passenger door and Marcus got in. Sandra Reyes was a small woman with quick brown eyes and an office covered in photographs of the young people her organization had helped over the years. She shook Marcus's hand and looked at him directly and told him that what she did at Second Step was help people find stable ground so they could figure out what came next. She asked him questions for almost an hour. She did not talk down to him. She did not treat him like a case file. She treated him the way you treat a person who has been through something hard and has survived it without losing themselves, which is to say she treated him with respect. By the end of that meeting, a plan had begun to take shape. Second Step would place Marcus in one of their transitional housing units, a small private room in a house with 3 other young men in similar situations. The room had a bed, a desk, a dresser, and a window that looked out onto a quiet street. There was a shared kitchen and a shared bathroom, and a house manager named Carl who came by 3 times a week to check in. Marcus moved in that same afternoon, And when Carl showed him his room and left him alone in it, Marcus sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the four walls around him and did not say anything for several minutes. He just breathed. David's foundation contact, Henry Park, came through within 2 weeks. The Scholarship Foundation had a special fund for students who needed to complete their secondary education before entering post-secondary programs. They would cover Marcus's re-enrollment fees at Jefferson, provide him with a bus pass, and upon his completion of the diploma, they would review his application for university scholarship support. David called Marcus to tell him this news on a Thursday afternoon, and Marcus was at the kitchen table at the Second Step house doing math problems from a workbook Carl had found at a thrift store. He listened to everything David said. Then he was quiet for a moment and asked David why he was doing all of this. David thought about how to answer that. He said that he had started his company with 1 truck and 12 clients because one person had believed in him when he had nothing to show them. He said that person had been his father's old business partner, a man named George who had lent him money and told him he had the right kind of mind. He said he had spent 30 years asking himself how to pass that on. He said he thought, standing near the exit of FreshMart on a cold Tuesday in November, that maybe he had just found his answer. Marcus went back to Jefferson in January. His teachers remembered him. Mr. Okafor, the mathematics teacher who had once told him he had a mind for systems, saw him walk back into class on the first morning and said nothing, just nodded once, the way you nod at someone who has done something hard and done it right. Marcus sat in the front row. He was the oldest student in 2 of his classes. He did not care. He did the work. He completed his diploma in June, 5 months later, and graduated in a ceremony where Sandra Reyes sat in the audience and David Calloway sat next to her and Henry Park sat 1 row behind them. Marcus crossed the stage and shook Mr. Graham's hand and received his diploma and did not cry until he was back in his seat, and then only for a moment, and only because he was thinking about his grandmother Edna and the way she used to say that no matter what happened, the morning always came back. The scholarship came through in August. Marcus was accepted into the engineering program at Ohio State University, with funding covered for 4 years. He moved into a dormitory room in September, and on the first night he lay on his new bed in his new room and looked at the ceiling and thought about cardboard on cold concrete, and coins on a rubber mat, and a woman named Brianna who had added 9 cents without being asked. He thought about a man who had watched him do math in a cereal aisle and had not looked away. He was not the same person he had been behind that grocery store. He was still Marcus Johnson, still 17 going on 18, still the boy who loved numbers because they never lied and never left. But he was also something more now. He was a boy who had been seen. And being seen, truly seen, when you have spent months invisible, does something to a person. It does not fix everything. It does not erase the cold mornings or the empty rooms or the sound of a door being locked from the other side. But it plants something, a small and serious thing, something that can grow. In his second year at Ohio State, Marcus Johnson joined a research group studying logistics and supply chain systems. His professor said he was one of the most naturally gifted students he had taught in 20 years. Marcus smiled when he heard that and wrote it down in the small notebook he still carried in his backpack, the same notebook with the broken pen tucked into the spiral, the one that had survived everything. He still had the pen. He had gotten it fixed.